It's July, which means we are 1 month away from Gen Con, the biggest board gaming experience in the US, which also means it's time for me to give you the Gen Con preview, where I tell you some of the hottest games you can expect to find at Gen Con. As always, this is not grouped up what I think will be the hottest or not, but rather simply just the order that you can expect to find them in the exhibition hall. This way you can zigzag through the booths, making sure to find whichever games you want to buy or demo as quickly as possible. So, without further ado, let's dive in and see what games this year Gen Con has to offer. For these videos, I now go actually by their booth number. This way, we're basically going to be sneaking through the aisles, making it much easier for you to plan your attack when it comes to buying or demoing out these games. There are a few rooms that will be outside of the convention hall, but I'm still going to list their locations so you can still add them to your list and mark them on your map. But without further ado, let's begin with Pandasaurus Games. Now, Pandasaurus tends to have a wide variety of games, but the two games that caught my eye was first, Box Top Pinball Haunted House. This looks like one of those games that really takes advantage of a 3D space, and it seems to have some flicking dexterity elements as well, so I'm very curious to see how this all plays out, and possibly whether this is going to be more of a series of pinball games, and just like any pinball table, you'll have tons of themes. But there's another game called Umbrella that has also caught my eye. This one seems to be more towards the puzzle lovers out there, all about trying to match different colored umbrellas in order to score points. From there, though, we've got Gauntlet Games. The game I want to point out here from them is called Turnip. I believe this is actually being sold exclusively first at Gen Con, and this is a bluffing game in which you'll be trying to play turnip cards, and if someone doesn't believe you, they ask you to turn up your cards, turn them over. Yes, this is a game based on a pun name. It also has some very beautiful art that you may recognize, though with a few turnip tweaks added to them. Then moving along, we have the collector's edition of Robinson Crusoe. People have been waiting quite a long time for this to finally come out, so if you didn't back it when it initially was on crowdfunding, hopefully now you'll get the chance to see what the new edition looks like and maybe pick it up. Speaking of new versions of beloved games, we have now a Colossal edition for Cat in the Box. This was actually a very clever trick-taking game, one that I highly recommended. This one is obviously bigger, has more deluxe components, and it seems to come with some new expansions as well. So if you missed out on the first time Cat in the Box came out, that means this is the perfect time to pick up this version of the game. Continuing your adventure, you're going to meet up with Seair Games. This is where all the Haven games will reside. And while if by some reason you've never picked up any Gloomhaven products, you can now pick up the second edition. You also have the chance to pick up, though, Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs. This is actually a solo game, so it's the perfect one to pick up and play while you're waiting for everyone else to show up for your either Gloom or Frosthaven campaigns. So next, we're actually going to visit a combination booth. This is where companies tend to fall under one umbrella. In this case, it's Flat Out Games and AEG. Now, AEG does have a lot of expansions for some of their popular games, though the one I'm most curious about is Cubitos Foul Play. But we've also got some new base games there for you to consider. Cascadia has two new flippin' rights, Rolling Hills and Rolling Rivers, as well as a spin-off of Calico titled Knitting Circle. We've also got the Let's Go to Japan game to help you plan your trip to Japan, and of course, the highly anticipated Undergrove from Elizabeth Hargrave. So, plenty of different games for you to pick up there. Now, Floodgate Games is going to want you to move with their expansion for Decorum, Moving Out. I saw a little example of this last year, which in this expansion Decorum, instead of simply just trying to design a house together, you gotta learn to pack it up and leave. Arcane Wonders has an expansion for their World Wonders game, Mundo Wonders Pack, and also a modern take on their old Foundations of Rome game, this one titled Foundations of Metropolis. If I recall, Foundations Rome was a crowdfunder exclusive, so maybe if you wanted to pick that up and you missed out last time, Foundations of Metropolis will be able to scratch that itch. Now, WizKids has both an expansion and a base game a lot of people are going to be excited about. First, there's the expansion for Mage Knight, the Apocalypse Dragon. Not only does this add a new hero, new enemies, it of course adds some new big bads, including of course the Apocalypse Dragon that the expansion is named after. But if you're looking for a new game, they have a new 2-player deck builder, Star Trek Captain's Chair. Go head to head with some of your favorite characters from Star Trek and see which one of you is truly worthy of the Captain's Chair. From here, we've got the Asmodee booth. It's going to cover a lot of space, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more games as we get closer and closer to Gen Con that are revealed. But as of right now, I think they actually are going to have one of the hottest games at Gen Con, and that's going to be the Mandalorian Adventures. This is a cooperative campaign game in which you'll play through the first season of The Mandalorian. However, that's not the only Star Wars products to be there. Star Wars Bounty Hunters sticks with the bounty hunting theme, but is a lighter, quicker game. But there's also the Star Wars deck building game, The Clone Wars, which is a standalone, not technically expansion for the original deck building game. And of course, this year, Star Wars Unlimited should be available there. Whether they'll actually bring product or even have product by the time you make it to the front of the store, that is up for debate. However, outside of Star Wars, there are two other products I want to mention. There's the expansion for the Heat racing game, Heat Heavy Rain. Heat was a beloved game from last year, so if you didn't pick up the core set last time, you can pick that up with this expansion. And there's the new Arkham Horror RPG for all the people who are in love with the Arkham Horror Files world. And then Leader Games, if you follow them, you already know what I'm going to say, and that's their new Arcs game. This is their spacefaring game that a lot of people have been very excited about. It's been arriving for people who backed it, and I believe here it should be up for sale if you missed it, so you can pick that up. I've only played it once so far, but I definitely say it's worth taking a look at. Then there are two games at Draco Studios that have caught my eye. The first one being Sea Dragons, and this one you seem to play as great sea serpents trying to protect the sea and sink a bunch of ships while you're at it, which of course means more sunken treasure for you. Then there's one called Neuro Riders. It seems to be playing as a game almost like Psychonauts, where you have to dive into the brain of people. But of course, things are going to be shifting and collapsing, so you got to adjust and deal with the changing environment. This one I thought is interesting. There's Trick or Treat Studios, and they had two things. First, there's a game for the Chucky series, the horror movie about the evil doll. So if you like those kinds of movies, maybe take a look at this game. But they've also got the second edition of Scoville, which used to be under Tasty Minstrel. It is a game I love, partially because I just like spicy food and peppers, and that's the theme of this game. So you can definitely check that out, since now there is a new way for you to pick up this game. So next up is Upper Deck, which is one of the hardest booths to miss. They usually go all in into their decoration. And the big game there, it seems to actually be Halo Mission Command. I don't know if that's actually going to be what their booth is based around. I don't know much about this game, but it is Halo, so it's going to be definitely interesting to see what it is. And if they go with a Halo theme, there's probably going to be some really cool Master Chief statues or standees to take photos of. From there we got 25th Century Games, and there are two games that caught my eye. First is Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. This is apparently a spin-off of Jekyll versus Hyde, and this time it's a two-player cooperative trick-taking game. On one side is Jekyll, the other is Hyde, and they're trying to avoid Scotland Yard. Then there's Green Team Wins Holiday Party. I bring this up mostly because Green Team Wins has been pretty popular as of late in the play groups I'm in. So if you want to add some holiday cheer to your Green Team Wins core set, maybe think about picking this up. Then we have another umbrella company situation. This time it's Flat River Group. There'll be multiple companies here, though some of the few that I've picked out are first from Yellow. You've got two King of Tokyo games, King of Tokyo Origins, which is designed to be a new entry point for players who maybe haven't picked up on the classic Kaiju Dice Battle game. And then for those of you who are a bit more experienced, there's King of Tokyo Duel, a new two-player game that is designed supposedly to be a bit more complicated than the usual King of Tokyo series games. There's also going to be Captain Flip there, which was one of the Spiel des Jahres nominees for this year, so automatically means it's something that I, and hopefully you, will want to check out. Heading over to Synapse Games, we have another return of a Tasty Minstrel game, this time Yokohama. I know this was probably the biggest title that people wanted to pick up when we learned Tasty Minstrel was going out of business. So this is definitely a game I think a lot of people are going to be happy to be able to get their hands on again. And last but not least, when it comes to the company at Flat River Group, there's Greater Than Games, and they seem to be bringing back an old classic, Defenders of the Realm. Now, I'm pretty sure this is just for showing off a prototype and maybe some demos, but it's still nice to see a classic game being brought back to modern tables. Then Renegade Game Studios, they've got so much stuff, especially if you like anything in the Hasbro world, be it their properties such as Transformers, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, or any of their Avalon titles, as Renegade Game Studios made a deal with Hasbro to help reprint some of their long-lost but beloved titles. However, the big one for me, which is probably no surprise to anyone, is a Transformers game, as there's now a Transformers skin version of Robot Rally. Robot Rally Transformers. Now, I know a lot of people like Robot Rally, and I probably should have played it without the needing of the Transformers retheming, but I won't lie, it doesn't hurt and does make me excited to try it out. Next up, we have Restoration Games, a booth that I always suggest you stop by, as they always do an amazing job of bringing classic games to the modern era of board gaming. Now, they'll have their new Crossboats and Catapults game there, both Castle Battle and Fortress War. But I think one of the big things a lot of people will be excited to pick up is their new Unmatched expansion, Slings and Arrows, as this features some of the contest champions, and there are some really clever game designs for the fighters in this box. From there, we have Shadowboard Games, which I know and love for Oathsworn. However, they have a new game titled Avalon: The Riven Veil. From what I can tell, this is not a campaign game. This is a standalone area control game, though you could probably guess by the name, it is a Arthurian legend themed style game. Next, we have Resm, which have some really great, clever party games. Now, I don't think this is for sale because I think the Kickstarter is actually still up, but they have the Phantom Ink expansion Arcana, but hopefully you will be able to pick up Avant-Garde, which I got the chance to play a demo of last year, and it is really clever and really fun, and I highly recommend you take a stop at this booth to try out any of these games, and hopefully pick some up for your playgroup. Next is a booth you probably know you're near, not because of the design of the booth, but rather it will have a huge line. That's because it's Ravensburger, and while they have a ton of games there, including a new one that sounds really funny called Oh My Pigeon, I imagine a lot of people are going to be there for Disney Lorcana. Last year, there was a huge line to get some Disney Lorcana product, and while it might not be as big since it's not releasing at Gen Con, I imagine there'll still be plenty of people trying to get their hands on those Lorcana cards. Next, though, we're going to go to Pandasaurus Games, who have made the Distilled game, which I absolutely love and definitely think you can check out. If you've already played it, well, then you can pick up the Distilled Cask Strength expansion, which of course adds more fun to your game. Or if you want to see something new, they should have their Luther game, which is all about making the musical instruments for all your classic musicians. Then from there, we got Contention Games, where you can check out the Slay the Spire board game, or I guess card game. Either way, I know the video game version is beloved, so I imagine the physical version will also be a great experience. Next, we've got Plaid Hat Games, and the big game they've got there is Wandering Galaxy. Now, this is part of their Crossroads series, which are heavy story-based games. The last time that the Crossroads games were in space was with Gen 7, and that wasn't very well received. However, their two previous Crossroads games, Forgotten Waters and Freelancers, are absolute huge hits. They're some of my favorite games. If you don't have either, I highly recommend you pick up at least one of those two, whichever theme fits your group more. And maybe I'm being a bit optimistic here, but I have a feeling Wandering Galaxy is going to be more like those two rather than Gen 7. Direwolf will have an expansion for the beloved Clank series. This one for the Catacombs line, Lairs and Lost Chambers. But they've also got a game based on the beloved hero animated series Invincible. This is a bag building game when you'll take on the role of some of the more popular characters from the show. And I think you're playing the heroes, but I'm pretty sure that Invincibles is one of the shows that maybe adds a bit more of a gray area when it comes to what we know about classic Caped Crusaders. Now we actually have another umbrella booth, and this is going to be for Hatchet Board Games. They actually work with multiple studios. They also have a room outside the exhibition hall, ICC 142. So if you don't see it here, you may want to check over there as well. But we've got a few games you might want to keep an eye out for. First off, there is Dead Cells, the roguelike board game, based on another very popular video game. But there's also the game Festival, which looks like another really fun fireworks-themed game. But you can also pick up In the Footsteps of Marie Curie, which you should probably be interested in, considering In the Footsteps of Darwin was also nominated for Spiel des Jahres this year. So definitely worth checking out, also because Marie Curie is also just a really cool scientist. Moving from there, though, we got North Star Games Studios, and they've got two games, which I talked a little bit about in previous years, but this time you should see much more finalized versions of these games. We've got Biomos, which I actually might be mispronouncing, but it's all about building different biomes on a planet. Had this really clever system involving different chips representing different environments. But we've also got Nature, which seems to be a new reimagining of the classic Evolution line. It has a much more modular system and should make things interesting if whether you want to play a much more competitive game or something where you get bigger creatures. Either way, it's definitely something worth to check out if you love the Evolution line or just any kind of nature-themed game. Asmodee Games has an Ultimate Edition for the Innovation line. This is a game that I know has been very popular. I've not played it myself, but this edition seems to compile everything that's been released, including the base game and all 5 expansions. So probably the perfect purchase for me if I want to just grab everything at once. Next is Board and Dice, and is basically the booth you gotta go to if heavy games are your favorite. They've got a bunch of titles, but the 3 I think most people are going to be interested in is first an expansion for their Barcelona game, but they have 2 new games as well. Windmill Valley, which it will have you play as tulip farmers in the Netherlands, as well as Reef Project, which will be all about restoring reefs. Now, their games are very heavy and tend to be on the longer side of playtime, but for me, if these play like their previous titles, I'll always feel engaged and never bored during that long game time. Now, Osprey Games is known for their Undaunted line, though this time they're leaving the World Wars and going to Undaunted 2200 Callisto. This is their sci-fi version of their Undaunted series, so I'm really curious how the game will play when they're outside of the historic limitations that they're used to. Now, Dev Games will have a ton of titles there and seems to always be the company I sleep on. Last year, that would go to their game, The White Castle. Though this year, I think the 3 games that are going to catch people's attention, there's one called Rock Hard 1977, which just sounds really silly and fun. And as a side note in particular, I love the stats on the player board go to 11. They've also got Cities, which is actually a game I talked about in my announcements a little while back. So I imagine a lot of people are going to want and try this one out. There's also a game called Sand, which I think may be interesting and popular with all the love for Dune, though. Personally, the cover to me almost says a bit more Avatar to me with just the look and style, which isn't a bad thing to me either. So definitely a game, though, I'm curious to check out. Then at Mighty Games, first we have Rebirth, which is a tile-laying game from Reiner Knizia. So it's already got that high pedigree. But they've also got plenty of other games. The other one that caught my eye is Fate Reforged Chronicles of Khan. This is for those of you who somehow don't have enough campaign games, though supposedly you can complete the episodes in under an hour, so maybe it'd be a bit of a quicker play session, assuming you can get your players together each time. Then we are going to actually leave the convention hall. First, a quick reminder that Hatchet Games is both going to be in the exhibition hall as well as that ICC room 142. But as always, CGE actually gets a room outside the exhibition hall. Here, it's going to be room 235 through 239. They're just connected as one big room. And of course, there are plenty of fun games there for you to check out. But the big one I think a lot of people are going to be going for is SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This is a big, heavy Euro game, and it looks extremely interesting to me, and it's going to be on the high end of my priority list of games to try out and maybe, if I'm lucky enough, get my hands on. I say this every video, but I can't fit every game that's going to be shown off at the convention. So if I missed the game you're most excited about, please let me know in the comments down below, not just for me, but for anyone else who's excited about Gen Con. And I also like to make a prediction of what I think are going to be the hottest games there. Now, this can shift from time to time, but hopefully this prediction helps maybe put some of those games higher up on your acquire list, just in case they sell out, and hopefully you are able to avoid that FOMO. Now, some years it's a bit more obvious and easy to guess, Disney Lorcana last year being probably the easiest guess I've ever made for this. This year, I think the games that are probably going to be very hot and will sell out quite fast are going to be the Star Wars Mandalorian Adventures game from Unexpected Games, SETI from CGE, and ARCS from Leader Games. I think all three of these games are going to be really popular, and it really depends on how much is going to be brought. I mean, the Star Wars one is probably the most obvious just because anything attached to an IP usually does pretty well. But I do still think that ARCS as well as SETI have really good chances of being extremely popular, and also not so sure in terms of the amount of product they'll actually bring to the show. Either way, if any of these three games sound really interesting to you, make sure that you find out where their stores are, where they're located on the map, and try to plan to visit them as early as possible. Outside of that, of course, the TCGs I think are still going to be very hot as well, with last year Disney's Lorcana basically shifting how we handle lines and deal with very large groups. I'm curious to see whether we're going to see the same amount of people going for Disney Lorcana this year, or if we're going to see the same amount, or if it's split because Star Wars Unlimited now will be allowed to be purchased and sold at this Gen Con. But it's not simply just about buying the product, but also playing it. And this is where they have a lot of events that tend to give out free swag and promos. So odds are, if you're interested in those card games, you may want to look up the events at Gen Con to see if there's any spaces left for you to sign up. But I think that's it for this Gen Con preview. Please let me know what you're most excited about, what you're most worried about at Gen Con down below in the comment section. And of course, I will be there. I'll be trying to do some live streams each night, just giving you a summary of what I did. It could also depend as we get closer and closer, more events seem to be scheduled later at night sometimes, so I might not just have the time to do a live stream, but regardless, I'll still be doing a summary video of everything I saw at Gen Con once I return. But for now, thank you so much for joining me in this video, and hopefully I'll see you at Gen Con.